It's preparing on YouTube.
Yeah, it says live on YouTube on my side.
Let's see if it gets there, because it didn't get to the other one. Let me just see if it, okay, it seems to be live on YouTube. Okay. Yeah, you're there. Okay. It's working. Okay, we're going to stay with YouTube. Just waiting for what's his face? For Godfrey and for Francois. We just play it by ear. Okay.
All right. Dr. Cole told me that Dr. Godfrey is running late. Do you have any information on Francois?
No. Well, Godfrey didn't tell me he's running late, but Francois told me he might be 5 minutes late.
Okay.
So join us now.
All right. So, okay, just something that we needed to clarify. It on the middle on the Google Doc is who's speaking first.
Oh, okay. I will say something and introduce you, and then you can take over.
Okay. And so don't I get to introduce you?
Oh, no, okay, you introduce me. I'll say something and hand back to you.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'll start and then introduce you so that you can speak.
Francois and Godfrey. You'll introduce all three of us, basically.
Okay, cool. All right, so that's fine. I have just an outline. I spoke to Dr. Carl earlier and we sort of went through how everything is gonna go. So should we wait for everyone to come on so that we can go through everything together?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I don't know, they might join us only after 4, so I'll just start in 5 minutes time before. Godfrey's on. Hello, Godfrey. Hi, Godfrey. So Godfrey's here.
Hi, Neville.
How's it, Godfrey?
How you guys doing?
Well, thanks.
We're live on YouTube, by the by. Not on Facebook. I'm just going to send you the link on WhatsApp.
I'm still here. I'm just getting out of the elevator real quick.
No worries. Godfrey's not frozen here. Hold on. I will see now. Luma. Got him ready. Jonathan. And Brian. Okay, let's see if everyone is not frozen. Let me just check. Godfrey's so that's a call. Yeah, Godfrey's video is off at the moment. Yeah. Video was off. Okay, good. Cool. We're going to go. Can't wait he'll be late. What's his face? We will start when you can. All right.
So will this screen with all three of our screens be the one that's showing all the whole time?
Whatever you see on the Zoom is what they will see.
Okay. Because I have a screen that shows whoever's speaking, makes the whoever speaking large, and then there's one.
Oh, I see. No, mine's on a different setting. Mine's got a gallery setting.
All right.
Carl's just setting it out. Sending out the okay. Carl just posting. Oh, you can hear me. Carl just posting the link. Post on the website, on the FB Facebook page. All right. Whew. It's all a bit crazy. Okay. Yeah, he has posted it there already. Okay. Good. How you, Godfrey?
Hey, Neville, how you doing?
I'm okay, and you?
Not too bad.
Do you know Danao?
No, I don't think I've met her yet.
Okay, Danao is our host today.
Oh, sweet. Nice to meet you, Danelle.
Nice to meet you, Niwo. No, Godfrey, sorry. Okay.
Okay. Guys, we can start. So it's in your hands, Danao.
All right, thank you so much, Neville. So I'd like to begin by greeting every single person that is tuned into us live on YouTube for this question and answer discussion on the COVID-19 pandemic, hosted by Access Habitable Planet Workshops. My name is Dineo Mabaleo. I am a Master of Environmental Sciences candidate at the University of the Witwatersrand, and I am an alumnus of the HPW workshop, and I am also a former co-lecturer in the program. So today we are going to be having like a question and answer session where our burning questions about this pandemic that has rocked the lives of people the world over will be answered by our panel of experts. And so we have with us here Dr. Neville Schwade, who is the Access Director and a marine biologist who is graduated from Rhodes University and the University of Cape Town. We have with us Dr. Godfrey Zivuo from Limpopo, who is also a planeteer, starting in HPW 12 and also a co-lecturer, and who now works as a postdoctoral fellow working on HIV research at the University of Virginia in the United States. And joining us later on, we shall have Professor Francois Engelbrecht, who is a VIS-based climate modeler and one of the leading scientists and in the Access Research Program. Francois is also a regular contributor to the Habitable Planet program as a key lecturer. Right now, I'll hand over to the Access Director, Dr. Neville Trade.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you very much to Danao and to Carl and to Godfrey and to Francois for sitting in. So we thought it would be useful for the Access community to know a bit more about what we are doing in Access in the COVID response, and also to offer an opportunity to all of our community to engage on this. Godfrey, if it's possible for you to put on your video, that would be helpful. Thanks. There he is. He's at work, so that's why he's got a mask on, I guess. I just wanted to quickly introduce this, and then Francois, he unfortunately is in another meeting right now. But he said he would join us as soon as he could after 4 o'clock. So he'll come on any moment. But just to let you know that not officially, unofficially, mostly because there's been no time to do anything official, we've organized a group of people, of scientists, through the Access network who are focused on the specific element of the COVID outbreak, which pertains to the environmental side of things. So we're looking at the effect of temperature and humidity and so on and so forth, mostly because there's a lot of talk about the fact that we're going into winter. And I know there's some questions about this, which we'll get to later. We're going into winter, and what does that mean? And in the north, there's talk about them going into summer. What does that mean? And is there a seasonal effect on the virus, and so on and so forth? So we put a group together, which is studying this, both from the literature and also doing some of our own work, which will be described later on. And so that's what we did now, and we got super busy working on that and basically doing pretty much nothing else at the moment to get that done. And so pleased that we've been able to do that. And that's kind of how we got this together. So that's what I'll say as an introduction. Danao, I'll go back to you, and you can start to ask the questions, and I'll answer Francois' questions best I can until he gets here.
Great. Thank you so much, Neville. And I'd like to encourage everyone that is already watching so far to please share a link to this video with other people, with their loved ones, for then awareness of everyone else. So since we have you with us, Godfrey, there was a couple of questions on virus transmission. And this question is from Dumisani Ndaba Award winner and the current chair of the Planeteers, Kumbuzo Khatebe. And he asks if a person is a carrier of COVID-19 and shows no symptoms, how does the virus spread from?
Yeah, you broke up a little bit there. I couldn't hear the last bit.
Right. So the question is that a person who is a carrier of COVID-19 who shows no symptoms, how does it spread from this person to the next person?
Oh, so that is all dependent on the incubation period of the virus. So what happens is that upon infection, when you get an infection, you don't get the symptoms immediately. The virus has an incubation period of about, at least at average, 5 to 6 days, and up to 14 days in some people. What happens is during that period, the virus will be replicating, but it will not be causing your body's not responding to it. Thus, you're not getting a high fever, you're not getting coughs or anything. The coughs and the fever are because your body's responding to it and there's an inflammation. I'm sure there's like some construction background that is happening here. I don't know if you can hear that. But
yeah,
back to the topic is once your body responds to the virus, that's when you start getting all those symptoms and everything. Now, with that said, if you are not presenting any symptoms, it simply means, and you are infected, it simply means that the virus is in your body, particularly your nasal cavity, and it's starting to replicate. And when it replicates, as a person, when you keep on communicating with other people, or coughing or sneezing, or not even just communicating with people, allows the virus to spread, because this is it spreads by droplets. So how one could be asymptomatic and still spread the virus is because your body's not yet responded that you become symptomatic. And as a result, you are a spreader who doesn't have any symptoms. So you can spread the virus even though you don't have any forms of symptoms yet. That's how the virus, because it's replicating in your body.
Neville, is there anything that you would like to contribute to that response? Neville, kindly turn on your audio.
Rookie mistake there, sorry. No, it's just important because that's what propaganda makes it so dangerous and why it's so critical that that lockdown and isolation of testing is so important, so that you can identify asymptomatic people before they become, propagators of the disease. But well covered. Thank you.
Okay, great. Speaking of the lockdown as well as transmission between people, the next question comes from Dr. Fabian, who is at the University of Zululand, and he sent through his question through Facebook, and he asked what would be the implications of allowing 2 days for people to, I assume, take a break before continuing the lockdown. How would that affect the potential spread of the virus, and would that be a good idea?
A break from the lockdown, like letting people free? Not a good idea. Absolutely not a good idea. Here's reasons why. Because we know that the virus has a very long incubation period. If you stop the lockdown now, what you're doing is that you are then giving the virus more chance to spread rapidly, because you'll have people who are asymptomatic, and we know that we have people who are asymptomatic because the cases are still going up. The reason why you see cases going up is because more testing has been done and people are found to be having the virus. That number that you see represents a very small portion of the real actual cases that are out there. If you relax the lockdown now, you're simply going to be giving this virus a free haul. Because think about this, if you relax now, people have been in the lockdown for more than 2 weeks now. A lot of people are going to be doing a lot of movement, and that's a recipe for disaster, because you're going to allow people to mingle, people are going to be traveling, and you're going to have widespread of viruses from people who are asymptomatic. So it will not be a good, I think it's out of the question right now, considering the fact that we still have increasing number of cases. So it would not be a smart move to actually relax anything right now, even for 2 days. 2 days is enough to get the virus seeded. We saw this by people coming in. Within a few days, they started infecting other people. So it wouldn't be a good idea to do such a thing. I mean, there are, political implications to this, like, people trying to restart economies and everything. But you need to, prioritize what is more important at the moment, considering that you're seeing what's happening in other countries like the United States. They have had this battle trying to figure out whether they should relax things or not. And that has come with very terrible consequences, because some governors didn't want to lock down stuff, and as a result, they got a very high number of cases. And the spread was so big because you're dealing with a virus that you don't see. And because you don't see the virus, you can't tell the extent of the damage until you actually do the testing, and you realize that this is a very highly transmittable virus, and you wouldn't want to take risks with that kind of virus.
All right. Thank you so much, Godfrey. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Professor Francois Engelbrecht, who just joined us. Welcome, Professor. So since you just joined us, I'd like to take this conversation on to speaking about the infection as well as symptoms and the effects. So Sihle Mlonyeni, who is from CPUT and is a co-lecturer for this year, 2020, asked the question, since it's almost winter now, is it wise to take the flu vaccine in that as an attempt to reduce the chances of getting COVID-19. So adding into that the impact of climate. Professor Engelbrecht, would you like to give a response to that?
Thank you, Josephine, but I think that first part of your question at least can be better answered by Godfrey.
So on the vaccine, because we know we're getting into the flu season, there's a lot of worry about people coming to get the vaccine. Here's one thing we should know first: flu and coronavirus are two completely different viruses. Even though they do cause related symptoms, but they are very different. A flu vaccine will not be protective for coronavirus, but only for an influenza. Now, should people take a vaccine for the flu? It would be advised to take a vaccine for the flu to prevent the flu, not the coronavirus. Why? Because if you prevent the flu, you reduce the chances of people coming into clinics or hospitals with flu-like symptoms, and then increasing the traffic that might increase transmission with coronaviruses, because this is the likely thing that's going to happen. People are going to start getting a cold or a flu, and they will come to clinics, and this is going to increase the number of tests. There is a chance of being infected by just going to a clinic, because there's just so many cases out there now. So I think if a vaccine is out there and there's a better way of getting that vaccine for the flu, people could do that, but they should not think that this flu vaccine is going to be protective for coronavirus. It simply just means that it will reduce the likelihood of people catching a cold or flu, and thus reducing the number of people coming to clinics and on hospital consultations, and reducing the transmissions as well.
Right, thank you, Godfrey. Professor Engelbrecht, would you like to contribute to that response?
I would like to at some point, Josephine, speak about seasonality and infection rates, the potential links between seasonality and infection rates, or the so-called transmission probability of the virus. But since I've just joined the discussion, I'm not sure if you've covered that already or if that's coming up late in the question. So you should advise whether I should discuss this now or later.
Actually, I think there are questions to know, right?
Yes, all right. So we had a question from Andres from Saltblad University, who is also a planeteer. And they asked, is it likely to see an increase in the infections of the virus during winter?
Okay, so let me give you a response. And my colleagues here may well also want to give their views. Let me start by saying that right now, this is one of the biggest questions around the novel coronavirus. In the Northern Hemisphere, there's of course a lot of hope that as they approach their midsummer period of June and July, that those higher temperatures will help to damp the infection rate. Now, Godfrey can speak in much more detail about why these viruses, or many of the similar influenza viruses and coronaviruses, viruses that we know much better and that have been around for a much longer time, are seasonal. But briefly, I can just mention that from a climatological perspective, there is some evidence to think that this novel coronavirus, similar to the other coronaviruses we know better, are less stable at higher temperatures compared to lower temperatures. There's also a reason to think that if there's a lot of water vapor in the air, so as climatologists we say, if the absolute humidity is high, then that water vapor environment helps to gravitate viruses that are floating around in the air to the surface, to the ground. So there is some empirical evidence starting to emerge in some of the initial studies, not yet peer-reviewed, that are giving us some reasons to think that it's the same it may be the same for the novel coronavirus. So that means in the Northern Hemisphere, there may be this dampening effect on infection rates as we move into summer. And unfortunately for us in South Africa, and in fact for the subtropical and mid-latitude Southern Hemisphere, there is the possibility that as we approach winter and as the air masses in South Africa become gradually drier and drier, and also systematically colder, that will in fact favor the infection rate, or the so-called transmission probability. Now, according to some of the first studies published on this topic, coming from China, where the initial outbreaks were, of course, we will, by the time that we reach the period June to August in South Africa, we will, according to those first studies, reach the maximum period in terms of where it becomes optimal for the virus to be transmitted as a consequence of our air masses becoming so dry and cold by June. So that the same type of temperatures that we've seen in the Northern Hemisphere where we had these massive outbreaks. Now I'm talking of the average daily temperature being between 5 and 11 degrees Celsius, combined with low humidity. We reach exactly that type of climate by June across almost the entire South African interior. So in the initial algorithm that a group of climatologists in South Africa have built, this group that I think many of the Planeteers will know of, the group coordinated by Neville Swade. This group of climatologists have formulated an algorithm based on these international studies. And according to that algorithm, the probability of transmission in South Africa will be more or less 40% higher by June compared to what it was in March, because of these decreasing temperatures and humidity. Now let me point out, this is certainly not a solid theory or hypothesis, but this is what is being suggested by some of the first empirical studies coming from the Northern Hemisphere and specifically China. And the responsible thing for us to do as South Africa, since this is an uncertain effect, the effect of climate on transmission probability, exactly because it's an uncertain effect, it is our responsibility to prepare for that type of possibility. So the correct thing to do for epidemiologists in South Africa and South America and Australia is to take into account in their modeling the potential effect of seasonality on transmission probability. So they should ideally run the epidemiological models with some scenarios where the epidemiological model is sensitive to the fact that temperatures and humidity will from now onwards be decreased.
Can I just jump in there quickly, please? Sort of clarify one thing. That is that what you're saying, Francois, is that the infection rate itself won't be affected by 40%, but the proportion or the part of the infection rate that's attributable to climate will change by 40%. So if let's just say that the climate proportion of infection rate is 5%, that will change by, that 5% will change by 40% of 5%, rather than the actual infection rate changing by 40%. Can you just clarify?
Neville, it's in fact the worst case scenario of the two options you've just mentioned. According to one of these first pioneering studies coming from China, it is the infection rate itself that can be increased by a factor as high as 40%, according to this algorithm, because of the presence of lower temperatures and lower humidity. So it's actually a very, very big potential effect of climate. One can almost say that if this algorithm holds true, high temperatures in February and March have almost the same magnitude of an effect on transmission rate as the lockdown. The lockdown is also in some crude estimates estimated to maybe decrease the probability of transmission by 50% in some of the estimates I've seen. Now, all these aspects are unsure, of course. Let me say that these papers, almost none of them have been peer-reviewed. They are highly empirical studies. But according to this one algorithm that is out there, that is how large the climate effect may be.
Okay. Thank you. I want to just add one more thing to that answer, then I'll go back to you, Dineo, if you don't mind. And that is to say that this is an emergency situation. And from a scientific point of view, I want to say this because this morning on the radio, I heard Professor Tim Noakes being interviewed in Cape Town on the radio. And why it's important is because he said some things which are deemed by some to be very controversial. I won't repeat what he said, but he made this very important point. He said, we're in an emergency situation. And generally, the scientific process is very thorough and very, very rigorous and slow. So if you do a study, you publish a study, that study gets peer-reviewed, it goes to referees, they read it, they comment, goes back and forth until it's ready for publication, then it gets published. It usually takes months. We are using information and data from papers that have not been published officially. They've been put out for consumption, but not peer-reviewed. So they haven't gone through the rigorous test yet. And that's because this is an emergency situation. We have to use whatever information we can get. And as Francois pointed out, the data that we've got is from midwinter in the Northern Hemisphere in a very different country with a very different set of circumstances. But it's all we've got. And the outbreaks have only begun in the autumn, if you like, in the Southern Hemisphere. And so, because of the virus. So anyway, bottom line is, that we're using the best information we've got, and we are circumventing what might have been a much slower process to get this information together. So there's a lot of uncertainty, but we have to plan with the best information for the worst case scenario, I would say.
Yes, that's very, very true, Neville. Now, if I may quickly jump in once more. Thank you. Let me say that when scientists are confronted by uncertainties, what we do is, our standard approach in the climate change sciences is we try to address these uncertainties through the construction of various scenarios. So the students attending today and listening in today, those with a background in climate change science, they will be very much familiar with the fact that when we project future climate change, it's for different greenhouse gas emission scenarios. So when we must manage risk as scientists, when we must contribute to the management of risk, we often do that by generating a variety of scenarios in terms of how a specific risk may evolve over time. And in the face of these big uncertainties about how seasonality impacts on transmission probability of the novel coronavirus, we actually have no choice but to bring in the scenario approach. And one scenario we must consider is that possibility where the approaching winter will significantly enhance the probability of transmission of the virus. That's the responsible thing to do. But at the same time, we are saying this, and this is only a scenario it's associated with a large amount of uncertainty, but this is one of the possibilities we must consider as we move into winter.
All right, much appreciated. Thank you very much, Professor Francois. Particularly on the issue of scenarios, I know that you've done work on future climate scenarios, particularly affecting Africa. And that was one of the questions that we had received through Facebook from a planeteer by the name of Notolo Benis. And she was asking if climate change could make diseases such as COVID-19 more or less likely. But we will move on from here. And just move, talking about, you mentioned the impact of temperature. So one of our core lecturers from this year, Sipiwo Butelezi from UKZN, asked that studies that are suggesting that warmer temperatures may inhibit the spread of COVID-19. But then she said that the human body maintains a temperature of around 37 degrees. So how is it possible that the virus can thrive in a body of 37 degrees Celsius, but a warm sunny day is too hot for it? So Godfrey, can you take that one?
Can you repeat the last bit, please?
All right, so she's asking that since the human body maintains a temperature of around 37 degrees, how is it possible that the virus can thrive inside the body, but a sunny day is too warm for it? Because studies have suggested that warmer temperatures work to inhibit the spread of the virus.
Yes, so I know the temperature thing. There's a misunderstanding of what scientists mean by saying that the virus is not stable at a particular temperature. Okay, for example, most viruses will be inactivated at about 50 degrees, 60 degrees. But these are conditions outside of the human body, not necessarily inside of the human body. You take a person's temperature to that degree, the people will be sick. Our body temperature is 37 degrees. So when we say a virus is less stable, we don't necessarily mean that it's completely inactive. We just mean that it won't replicate with efficiency at that temperature. And I think this has also led to a misconception and a lot of rumors that people were trying to blow dry themselves because they believe that if you blow dry yourself in the nasal cavity, you'll then kill the virus. It doesn't work like that. Our bodies are able to maintain a stable core temperature, that even if the external temperatures are different, our body maintains a 37 degree temperature. So whether it's summer or it's in winter, your body needs to maintain the core temperature. And as a result, it's favorable for the virus. Now, coronaviruses replicated around 31, 32 degrees Celsius. This one is called a novel coronaviruses because it manages to replicate even at 37 degrees or so. And that's because it first infects the upper respiratory cells, and then it has the ability to go down your lungs. And also we have evidence that shows that it also infects other cells, like I think your kidneys and other cells that have the ACE2 receptor, which then tells us that the virus has a much more broader temperature tolerance range. So high temperatures, yes, they disable the virus, but not necessarily inside your body. They disable the virus outside in the test tube. That's what we see, that we subject these viruses in a test tube at that temperature, they die out, but not necessarily in the body because your body maintains a very stable temperature. So there is a little bit of confusion of what temperature is going to do. I think when people say the temperature is going to reduce this, they're actually referring to what Professor Francois was saying, that when days get warmer, the humid goes up, and as a result, the transmissions goes down. There's a correlation with that, rather than to say that the temperatures, when they go up, they're going to kill the virus. That's not how it actually works. The temperatures that are out there don't really affect the inner person. Your body is able to maintain a stable core temperature. I don't know if that's clear.
Well, thank you. So speaking of people's efforts to protect themselves from contracting the virus, 2012 co-lecturer Robert McFarlane asked the question, do N95 masks work? And you can take that one.
So the reason why we're using masks is because we know that the virus is spread by droplets. What the mask does, it protects, what it protects the most, it protects the person who's not necessarily wearing the mask. If you are sick and you are shedding a virus, wearing a mask protects those who are not with you. At the same time, if you are not sick and you're wearing a mask, it does protect you from things going in, but it's not as efficient because there's a risk of you having the virus clotting into that mask. And then because of bad habits, you touch the mask, you touch your face, like what we see on national television. People are touching masks, they're touching their faces, or they're using the mask the wrong way. You increase the chances of getting infected. So masks in the beginning were only supposed to be worn by people who have a cold or who are having symptoms of coughing, because it protects other people from getting to, because it traps everything in your mouth. But at the same time, if you're negative, everything is trapped outside of that mask. And if you have bad habits, you will be touching that mask and touching your face, and then increases your chance of getting an infection.
Thank you. All right. So I also have a question here. Speaking of, because the ill use of masks, as you just explained, can affect the rate at which transmission takes place, and also can act contrary to the actual intended purpose of masks, which is to protect those that don't have the virus. A question from Rina, who is a mother of one of our co-lecturers, Helen, sent through via WhatsApp. She asked if taking ARVs will increases one's chances of survival if you catch the virus, because apparently the Chinese use ARVs to treat patients.
On that question of ARVs, I haven't followed much the research on taking antiretrovirals to treat coronavirus, because first of all, when you take ARVs, they usually try to stop. I'm really thinking that they're going to be using protease inhibitors, because coronaviruses have a protease that kind of cleaves these proteins to make the viral components and then assemble it. So I haven't followed the literature on people using ARVs and treating coronaviruses, but I would suspect that if they were using ARVs, they would be using protease inhibitors, which I haven't seen any very strong evidence that shows that these protease inhibitors actually do work against proteases of the coronavirus. But I would not say that taking an ARV would be efficient in controlling coronavirus, as there is no strong evidence that suggests that. If that was the case, we would have seen countries that have high access to these ARVs taking that approach and having a success, but we don't see that. You look at UK, you don't see that kind of thing. The United States is one of the countries that has a lot of access to these ARVs, but they don't seem to be having that. And I think people have discussed about this. Anything that is coming from China right now, to be honest, I would be cautious of how I take the evidence that comes from that place, because there's a lot of unknowns coming from that country.
Thank you. Neville?
So I just wanted to say something generic about the treatments. And again, I'm not a doctor of medicine, and I'm just a consumer of technical information. And for your interest, if you want to, you should go to the WHO website and look at their research section on COVID. And every day they update this database with papers or studies that have been put out, both peer-reviewed and not peer-reviewed, and articles and all sorts of information. The number of papers last I looked, which was last week, are about 4,000 papers in, where are we now? We are in the 3rd month, just started the 4th month of the year. So these papers started coming out in late December, and since then there have been papers written up until now. And so I'll probably guess today they're probably 6,000 papers, okay? As I said, many of them are not peer-reviewed. Most of those are clinical. They're about clinical treatment, not about what we're talking about in terms of the environmental effects, but they are clinical work. And what's happening is, so you have to understand how new this is. While we were all braaiing at Christmas time, just the other day, people were starting to die in China, okay? And only in about late December, early January, did people, in the global community start pricking up their ears to the idea that there might be a dangerous virus emerging. It's been 2.5, 3 months since then, and bam, the world's shut down, okay? There's such a little data out there. Most of the information that we're getting is really at the forefront of clinical treatment. So as Godfrey says, there are theories out there and hypotheses out there that potentially this drug or that drug or this treatment or that treatment may work, and it may work indeed on some people in some circumstances, but it's not universal. Just one example, I read an article yesterday about a doctor in New York, who's one of the epicenters of the disease right now is New York, who discovered that by turning his patients onto their stomach, they are able to survive more than they're lying on their back. Now, that's not a drug, it's just a treatment approach, right? But again, there's nothing, no publication about it, there's nothing like that, okay? It's simply information from the front lines of this war, which may or may not work. So we can't prescribe those treatments because we just don't know if they are real. It might be anecdotal, might be lucky. We just don't know. So I just wanted to add that to God. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. And that is much appreciated because there was a lot of questions that came through about infections, about symptoms, about the effects of the virus. And it's great to have this platform, and I appreciate that, we already have some myth busting going on. So I'd like to pose some of the questions that were around infection symptoms and effects. Tasha Smith from SOCO, which is SOCCO, asked about reinfection. If some or all people that recover have some immunity, and and I think she'd like to have some information about the 2 strains. What's up with the 2 strains, because apparently the coronavirus, there is a novel coronavirus and it happened to mutate. So I think she'd like some more information on that.
Okay, let me just go back to the previous point on data that's coming in. I'll come into this one. So the reason why this should be taken caution, like what Neville said, a lot of these cannot be prescribed. And what happens is that if you go into the public and say that, hey, I've tried this and this works, you will create a demand. And sometimes that demand can be very problematic. If you say a particular drug, like I think there was chloroquine was one of the drugs that people were talking about, that this thing does work for coronavirus. There was a lot of people getting prescriptions for chloroquine, even though chloroquine is usually used for malaria. And that then leaves people who actually need the drug not getting access to the drug. So that's why it's not, we can't make any of these recommendations if there is no solid and a go-ahead from the World Health Organization or NICD or anyone who's the authorities of drug administration. Now coming to the current question, which I think I just forgot what you said. Just to repeat the last question again.
All right. So Tasha Smith is asking about reinfection. She's asking if some or all people that recover have some immunity. And she wanted to know about the 2 strains of the virus, how they work, I guess.
Okay, so on the immunity, it's still an ongoing research whether people are developing long-lasting immunity. There are antibodies that people are developing, but whether those antibodies are long-lasting and they are effective for the next infection, it's not very clear. There's still some research going around for that. On the strains, the virus, the coronavirus, like you might know, most of these viruses have been there. They've been discovered in the 60s, and coronaviruses have been with people for a long time. Now, they've not been a problem because they never really used to cause really harmful effects. What happened is if you've got a coronavirus, if at the worst, you would get like a common cold or just feel under the weather, but it will clear out without a problem. And then what happens is most coronaviruses actually come from bats, and from bats, there is a little bit of spillover into probably an intermediate animal and then into a human being. And the first outbreak of the coronavirus was in 2002, I think, the SARS coronavirus, which jumped from a bat into an intermediate animal and then infected human beings. That was problematic. Another coronavirus related was the MERS, the Middle East coronavirus, which was from a bat, got into an intermediate believed to be a camel, and then became a problem when it got into human beings. This one was called novel coronavirus because we didn't know what we were dealing with in the beginning. When we compared the sequences of the coronavirus, the current coronavirus with what we already had, we saw that there were changes that happened in the spike protein of the coronavirus, which enabled this virus to infect human cells with much more high efficiency. And then it started from being called a novel coronavirus, and then the name changed into Wuhan virus. I think you've heard about that, but there were a lot of problems with that because it was stigmatizing Wuhan as the origin of the coronavirus. And then it was now named SARS coronavirus 2, because it's the same virus as the first coronavirus outbreak. However, it's got changes on the spike protein, and it's a second outbreak of the same coronavirus. So that's why it's called SARS coronavirus, which is severe acute respiratory syndrome virus that is caused by the coronavirus, and the disease that it causes, so COVID-19, coronavirus disease 19.
All right. Thank you. And still on the note of infection, so there was a question from a co-lecturer by the name Sanalisiwe Njilo, and she asked, what does it mean for someone to have recovered from the coronavirus? Does it mean that their symptoms are gone, or does it mean that they are completely cured of the virus and it's not in their body? Can you give us a response to that?
Yeah, so currently the criteria for declaring a person free from coronavirus or clearing them free from coronavirus infection, COV2, is that the person needs not to present symptoms. There should be no symptoms, no high fever, no dry coughs. And then 2 extra tests have to be done 24 hours apart for the same coronavirus. So what happens is that the test involves amplifying 4 regions of the virus. And then if those 4 regions are positive, then you're positive for the coronavirus. For you to be declared negative or have recovered is that you don't present symptoms, because you need to take into consideration there will be people who have the virus but don't have symptoms. Those people, after 2 tests that are done 24 hours apart, there should be no signal for the virus. You should bear in mind that there is evidence that shows that even when people have been cleared after the 2 tests, there are a possibility of people still having low background virus replication. And that has been a cause of concern because people are just doing some investigation in this. But for today, as for today, the criteria is that 24 hours separated tests, which are done twice, declares a person free from coronavirus and have recovered from the coronavirus. And the reason why you also see low number of recoveries is because to do 2 extra tests on one person is quite costly. So it costs a lot of money to do multiple tests. The first test itself is a problem, but doing 3 tests for a person can become problematic. And you can imagine if that person is tested twice and then he happens to be positive, they have to wait again and test that person twice again, 24 hours apart, to actually confirm that is negative. So it does come with a cost as well.
Thank you so much. So speaking of recoveries, a lot of the cases that have been confirmed in South Africa have been found to be taking place in the Gauteng province. So Nadine, co-lecturer, sent through a question through Facebook, and I think you can take this one, Professor Engelbrecht. They ask that since the highest number of COVID-19 cases take place in Gauteng, we also know that air quality is relatively poor in that province. The question is, how could the quality of the air influence the number of COVID-19 cases? I don't know if you can take this one, Professor Engelbrecht.
I can contribute to a potential answer, and maybe Neville or Godfrey would also like to add some information. All I can say is, of course, that pollution itself is, of course, an extremely harmful phenomena worldwide. Just recently, I've seen this absolutely staggering statistic that every year one can attribute the deaths of about 6 million people globally to poor air quality. Another statistic is that poor air quality is reducing the length of the average life on planet Earth by about 3 years. So one can imagine that a virus such as this novel coronavirus that affects the human biology in the way that it does may perhaps have even more severe effects if you have been living and if you've already been affected by the continuous exposure to low air quality. So once again, this now goes straight into the medical field and to human biology, which is not my field of expertise. But what I can say, I can give more environmentally bad news for South Africans. In the interior of South Africa, specifically on the Highveld, and specifically where we have the industries and the big coal plants. So the Mpumalanga Highveld in South Africa, Johannesburg, Sasolburg, Vereeniging, these places experience their lowest and poorest air quality also in the middle of the winter. And that's because of the fact that in winter time, the so-called inversion layers form over the interior of South Africa. So that effectively means that a layer forms in the atmosphere where temperature is increasing with height. Usually temperature is supposed to be decreasing as we go higher up into the atmosphere. But when an inversion layer forms, temperature is increasing with height, and that has the effect that air pollution particles are trapped close to the surface. The atmosphere becomes so stable that those air pollution particles can't rise higher up into the atmosphere and get dispersed. So there's also very, very strong seasonality in air quality in South Africa. So as we're approaching the winter, where the low humidity and the lower temperatures may well affect transmission probability, unfortunately at the same time, we are also approaching the season of poorest air quality. which may in fact worsen the impact the virus has on our own biology. That's as far as I can contribute to this specific question. Yeah?
Thank you. Neville and Godfrey. Godfrey, would you like to contribute to that response?
Okay, I think just to add on the other side of this is that if you look at cities like Johannesburg, it's a very densely populated city. So population size also will matter. If you have, just like in New York, it's a very densely populated. So virus transmission is very efficient in densely populated areas. And as a result, I think that's why you would see them as hotspots, because there's just so much traffic of people, and that's the infections might increase. With climate as well, it does affect the behavior of people. In winter, it is known that people are really mostly indoors or in closed places because it's cold outside. So people are really in close contact. And as a result, that can also increase the chances of transmission. So that's another thing to take into consideration when we look at these factors altogether.
Thank you. So sort of staying on the issue of the air quality. Well, I stumbled in the news shortly after news about the outbreak of coronavirus in China. There were some articles online talking about how the lockdown in China has actually affected energy use and actually affected emissions in the country. So I had a question on that, on how much you can reply upon that data, that initial data saying that that has affected emissions in the country and affected pollution, and if that this has implications, Professor Engelbrecht, on the work that you've done on future climate scenarios. Would that have implications, the lockdowns that are taking place all over the world and the reduction in pollution that has been seen, would that have implications on future energy use as well as future climate?
Yes, Dinero, that's yet another fascinating and striking impact of COVID-19. It's an event of such an immense global impact that, we've been speaking about how seasonality may impact on the virus, but this outbreak of COVID-19 disease is so powerful that it's in fact affecting global levels of air pollution and thereby even climate itself. So because of the massive reduction in industrial activities in China at a time when the outbreak was peaking in China, and because of the associated reduced demand for energy from specifically the coal power plants, at the time when the outbreak was peaking, remotely sensed data levels of pollution indicated that carbon dioxide levels, carbon dioxide emissions were reduced by about 25% compared to the standard levels of emissions. Now that's an enormous amount, because you should take into account that China today produces about 30% of the world's carbon dioxide emissions. So take away 25% of that 30%, and it's an effect that you can actually observe globally. And of course, across all the major cities of the world, we can also see in the remotely sensed data that other pollutants such as nitrous oxide, the pollutants produced by traffic, by cars, by the transport system globally, those have been substantially reduced as various cities and countries went into various degrees of lockdown. Now, there are people out there that are saying that the planet is being repaired. These are the unintended benefits of the outbreak, but I should unfortunately immediately point out that these are most probably very, very, very short-term effects. What we've seen in 2008, at the time of the global financial crisis, is that because of the reduced economic activity in 2019, there was a global decrease in carbon dioxide emissions of, I think it was in the order of 1.5%. But in the following year, 2010, as the nations of the world were trying to make up the lost time and fire up the economies again to their full potential, we saw a 6% increase in carbon dioxide emissions. So environmentalists refer to this phenomena as so-called revenge pollution. And unfortunately, maybe I'm a bit cynical, but I suspect that we are going to see the same thing. I mean, we know that the Trump administration apparently can't wait to reopen the economy, right? And in China, we can already see the industrial activities being on the rise again. And it's a very, very likely that nations will focus on the short term, fire up the economies again. And that means they are going to burn coal in so many parts of the world. So we should not think that this decrease in global levels of pollution and even in the greenhouse gases that are, of course, causing climate change is going to be a permanent feature. This is probably a short-term phenomena, and no long-term benefits from this, unfortunately. That's the most likely outcome.
Can I just pop in there quick and say, for us in South Africa locally, you obviously all aware that there's been no load shedding since there's been lockdown, right? Even prior to that. And that's important because I've heard it, you know, some of us know people who know people, that the demand for power in South Africa has dropped, I think it's 20% or more. 200 or two, the figure in my head is 2,000 megawatts or something like that. There's been a huge reduction. So the pressure on Eskom has reduced substantially, which means they're burning a lot less diesel, a lot less coal. In fact, they're burning no diesel and a lot less coal, so that the impacts of our coal-generated power will have dropped substantially. But as you point out, Francois, the economic impact depends on the recovery, on how quick we'll get back on the so-called interesting term, revenge pollution. But on that score, just to alert you to the World Economic Forum's website and coverage of the economic impacts of this event. And I raise that because some of the scenarios being painted by some world experts in economics are incredible. There were some very good articles about this not being a blip, but being a complete reset on one extreme, if you like, right? And that we may not see the world recover to the same level of activities, or at least it's an opportunity to change things. Anyway, there's a whole range of scenarios, economic scenarios, as there are all kinds of scenarios on the impact of this. But I strongly recommend you go to wef.org, World Economic Forum, and look at some of the very digestible articles that are written there, and slideshows and presentations and interviews. Thanks.
Can I add a small? Oh, you can go ahead.
I'll be very quick, Godfrey.
Sure.
Thanks, Neville. Yeah, I can just quickly build on this point Neville has just made. Neville, you may well be one of those idealists out there, right? Because the positive view on this is that this is an opportunity for countries to, when they are back on the road to recovery, rather promote incentives to the renewable sector, to the renewable forms of energy, towards promoting that part of the economy, towards helping a specific country onto that pathway of pursuing its economic development rather through the renewable forms of energy, as opposed to the fossil fuel based energies. But as I've already said, the more cynical way out there is that the short-term solution is going to be simply to burn more coal fast. So we'll have to see what's going to happen. But there is this positive view that one can, of course, get something positive out of this crisis. And who knows, maybe at least in some countries, there will be some of that positive pursuits happening.
Yeah, I was about almost to add in the same, like it kind of like indicates that we have the power to change things if we want to change things. So it's a very good sign, really, that when people decide to do certain things, we can play a role in making our climate better. I have a question for Neville on regards to the ASCOM thing. Since we are approaching winter, and I know that majority of households in South Africa don't have very good air conditioning and heating systems. Isn't there going to be a high demand in electricity because people are going to be using heaters because they'll be indoors?
Um, I don't have an answer for you because I don't know enough. I can only speculate. You know, one of the things, one of the explanations, as you probably know better than I, for the seasonal occurrence of flu is in winter, in particular, is because of people cloistering, meaning when it's cold out there, you close your windows, you make a microenvironment inside your house. And so indeed, the cold is going to change behavior. There is demand, higher demand in winter for power, generally speaking, from heaters. But there's also the people that use fire to warm their homes. So there's increased indoor pollution during winter and all those kinds of things. So I don't really know, but my conjecture is indeed there will be an effect. Before I relinquish the floor, just on a point of order, it's now just after 5 o'clock or 5 o'clock. I'm very happy to go on for a bit longer if the others are. I'm not sure if you're available. Just indicate, please, quickly to Danea if you can.
Yes, thank you very much, Neville. I am aware that we are running a bit over on time. I don't know if all our panelists, you can allow us just one final question before we can get to final remarks. Can I get an indication? All right, thank you very much. This question comes from a planeteer, Ginelwe Monjane. And her question is directed to Godfrey as a virologist. She asks, has there ever been a study projecting this global pandemic? And what are the chances of another pandemic in the future?
Outbreaks have been something that people have been taking a look at. So this is not like a complete surprise. It's just that when it happens, it catches everyone off guard if the systems are not ready. So when I say systems are not ready, we're talking about health facilities, hospitals, response. How quick do you detect the virus? How quick do you mitigate it? That's what people were not prepared in. And this is because people don't want to invest on something they don't see. It's very difficult for people to put a lot of investment on something they don't see. Until it happens and it overwhelms everybody, that's when people decide to take it seriously. What I know is that on the current of research is that people have always knew that some respiratory virus, but they were thinking as in the form of a flu or something, would show up, and we need to be ready. And people have been trying to put things in place for that. But I don't think anyone has thought of a virus like coronaviruses. Flu has been the major thing, but not necessarily coronaviruses. And we've seen that we are not really ready for pandemic scale outbreaks versus endemic scale outbreaks. If you look at Ebola, it was really controlled quickly because it was so endemic. It was not necessarily a pandemic. But when a pandemic hits, no one is really ready for that kind of a thing. Zika virus, endemic in Brazil, was controlled and taken care of much quicker. But when it comes to viruses that hit the whole world, there's always a slow response to that. We've seen it with the AIDS pandemic. It killed a lot of people until we got the drugs. It's only until we got the drugs that's when things got better. So I think this is going to be an ongoing thing until people take a decision to make an investment for future outbreaks, that because they will come as the climate change. We are losing our glaciers, and a lot of viruses being released. It will come a day where a new virus strain comes in and hits us hard, and if we're not ready for it, we'll just have to see how it goes. But I think as far as research is concerned, we know that infectious diseases are the most prominent threat to the globe than any other threat that we can think about.
Thank you. Yes, Neville?
Just to say that there are books written about doomsday scenarios, you know, there are a whole variety of them. Pandemic is certainly one of them. We have had other pandemics, as everybody must be aware, like the so-called Spanish flu of a century ago, almost exactly, and the SARS and MERS outbreaks we had, although they weren't as severe. I don't think they were as infectious as these ones. We have flu pandemics every year. You might be surprised to know, I learned very recently, since I became an epidemiologist, as one of my colleagues like to say since last Sunday, that if I had to ask you to guess, on average, how many people in South Africa, or what's the range of people that die every year in South Africa from flu? Think about a number in your head, and then I'm going to tell you in a moment. The answer is between 6,000 and 11,000 people die every year in South Africa. Now, 6 is the low on a good year, 11 on a bad year. That's a huge number of people, and that's an epidemic which is global. You remember swine flu, remember bird flu, all of these kinds of things. You know, Carl has just pointed out. In case you're wondering why I'm on my phone, I just want you to know that I'm on my phone talking to Carl, who's running things in the background here. Not being disrespectful. And Carl's just reminded me to say that, of course, and this is what Godfrey specializes in, is HIV is a pandemic. The rate of infection is so much slower that it's a slow pandemic. And I don't know how many millions of people have died from those. It's the big issue with this one is the infectiousness of it and the rate of spread. So it's all happening very quickly, and that's crashing economies and crashing health systems and so on and so forth. So, you know, these happen a lot, actually, just not at the scale and speed at which this one has.
Great. Professor Engelbrecht, would you like to contribute to that?
Yes, I'd like to make a closing statement from my side. Building on some points Godfrey and also Neville made earlier. There is some lessons to be learned for how we approach our battle against the climate crisis from the current battle against COVID-19. We should take note of the fact that almost every single country in the world has accepted enormous costs and tremendous risks to their economies because they are putting the health of their peoples first. Okay. That is something we have not yet seen happening when it comes to battling climate crisis. Because in order to mitigate climate change, it is, of course, not such an immediate crisis, but it's still a very real crisis. And it is already impacting on people's lives across the world. But the similarity is that in order to mitigate climate change, we must also accept costs to our economies. There's no denying that in order to mitigate climate change on the short term, you must accept costs to your economy. If you're a country serious about mitigating climate change. In the long run, you get back all that money. The benefits from reducing the impacts of climate change are so enormous that in the long run, you get back that investment fourfold or fivefold. But in the short term, you must accept costs. And so far, there has not been the political commitment across the world to make that investment and to accept those costs. And as a consequence, people are suffering because of climate change. And people will increasingly be affected by various aspects of climate change, but starting by increases in extreme events such as large-scale bushfires or multi-year droughts. And there's already a lot of evidence of these events being on the rise across the globe. So maybe, you know, when the nations of the world meet again at the big conference of the parties, where the Paris Agreement must be implemented, that meeting was supposed to happen this December in the UK. It has now been postponed until the middle of next year. Maybe when the countries of the world meet again, they will bring something of this spirit of putting people first and growth in the economy second. And maybe we will arrive at this conference with an international unity. Hopefully we will then be on the winning side in the battle against the virus, and maybe we can take some of that spirit, that human spirit, into the climate change negotiations, the very important meeting now scheduled for the middle of 2021.
Thank you very much, Professor. So at this point, so the professor did go a bit ahead of me in terms of giving his concluding remarks, but I would like to give Dr. Neville Strayed and Dr. Godfrey to give their closing remarks. So some final myth busting, some final advice in terms of management suggestions moving forward that you may have. Dr. Godfrey, would you like to give your closing remarks first?
Yeah, I was just recently watching the news because I really keep tabs on the news in South Africa. It's my country anyway. And I see that, you know, there are some challenges during this time, but I think pleading to all South Africans in times like these where things are so difficult, that cooperation would be the best thing to do right now, because we are dealing with something that we've never dealt with in the country. So people should stay in their homes, wash their hands, and really do with due diligence the necessary things that they need to do to avoid and to flatten the curve of this virus. Because we really don't know. We are learning this thing as we go. So it's something that we don't want to take chances. Let's learn from the countries that are already in the middle of a red zone, and hope that, you know, things get better. Until we get the treatment, we really want to keep the curve as low as possible so that things get better. So for me, I would just say, let's just do what we need to do.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to be very brief. I have nothing to add. I think everything's been said. I would just suggest to our planeteers and to students out there is to educate yourselves as much as possible about this and related matters. There's a lot to learn. There's a huge amount of information. Some of it is good information. Some of it is bad information. And to filter through that is difficult. But it's really important that you learn as much as you can. And there's incredible resources out there, from Johns Hopkins University's Monitor, which seems to have become the sort of center point of all that information, you know, to what I've suggested before, WEF stuff about the economy, more about the sciences, just an enormous amount of information to consume, which I have to say I've become quite obsessed about myself. And I agree with Godfrey, we've got some special challenges here. I mean, all countries have got challenges, all different kinds of challenges. It's quite a fascinating experience, this. It's an historical experience. It's one of these things that you know, would end up in the Bible if it had happened in biblical times. It is a biblical scale event. It's something you'll never forget for the rest of your lives. You'll remember this forever, actually. And the consequences that will still come, you know, we will remember this forever, as one does the flu of 1918. So, you know, be positive. There's a lot that we can gain as well as lose in the circumstances. Thank you very much. And thanks to our panelists for agreeing to do this, and to you, Danae, for chairing.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to take this moment to appreciate every single person that tuned into this live broadcast and participated in this discussion. Thank you very much for sending through your questions. Our panelists will be available through our Facebook channels to respond to more questions. And I would like to extend an invitation to people to share this, because so much valuable information was shared in this discussion, and a lot more people could benefit from receiving it. I would like to appreciate Access and the Habitable Planet Workshops for hosting this event. I'd like to appreciate Dr. Carl Palmer for his role in organizing this event. Thank you very much to our panelists, Dr. Neville Schwade, Professor Francois Engelbrecht, and Dr. Godfrey Jibu. I have been Dineo Mabolego. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Dineo.
Thanks.
Bye. Goodbye.